Um, let me just share this slide. Okay, can you see the slide? Hello?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so the first slide here is basically just want to introduce you to the concept of economic growth, right? Because when we talk about economy, and you hear a lot of many times people will mention economic growth, okay? But what exactly is economic growth? Yeah. So some topics that we'll cover is basically firstly an introduction to economic growth, and then modern economic growth, and then institutional structures of growth, and then what is actually the factors or the determinants of growth. Okay, so these are the subtopics that we'll cover, inshallah. So when we talk about growth, economic growth, okay, basically economic growth is increase in real GDP or real GDP per capita over some time period. Right. So if you we will go through GDP much deeper later on, but basically GDP is gross domestic product. Okay, and how to calculate GDP is basically each country will calculate how much is the consumption. Okay, how much do people consume plus investment. Okay, how much do people invest or how much do businesses invest, and then how much do government spend. Okay, government spending. Okay, plus how much does a country export. So export means the country sells, right? So if you produce something in a country, you export it, meaning you sell to another country. Okay, and then you minus the import. Import is how much you buy from a foreign country. Okay, how much you buy from a country that is outside from your country, that's import. Okay, and this is basically net export. Net export. Okay, so a GDP, when you see the figures of GDP, it is basically consisting of these four factors. Okay, so usually in terms of the equation, you will write GDP equals to C plus I plus G plus net export, okay, which is export minus import. Okay, so then every year, if you see, for example, the GDP of US is this much and that much. If GDP of Malaysia is this much, so it's basically the figures are representing consumption, investment, government spending, and also net export. Okay, so economic growth is basically looking at how much does the figure increase over a time period. Okay, and usually we do not look at the figures in terms of dollars, but we look at the percentage rate of growth. Okay, so usually we will be quoted with figures. For example, they will say GDP increased by 5%, GDP increased by 2%, GDP increased by 10%, right? So instead of GDP increased by 1 billion, GDP increased by 2 billion. So they wouldn't, we do not look at the dollar figures, but we look at the percentage, okay? And basically, growth is a main goal of any country. Okay, so any country would want to see their figures to grow every year. Okay, and there is an arithmetic equation, mathematical equation on growth. Okay, so this is called the rule of 70. Okay, so this basically provides a number, approximate number of years that is required to double real GDP. Okay, so for example, if you have if the country has a GDP of 100 billion, okay, and the annual growth rate on average is around 5%. Okay, so how long does it require for this 100 billion to become 200 billion? Okay, so this rule of 70 can provide this number, right? So basically 70 over 0.05. Let me just, and not 0.05, over 5. Okay, so basically for a country that has a growth rate of 5%, okay, they will require 14 years to double their GDP. Okay, so if they are consistent over 14 years, consistently get 5%, they will get 200 billion over the 14 years. Okay, the growth will be 200 billion. So this is a rule of 70. Yeah, it's just something that is good to know. Okay, so these are just some.
So what is the 5%?
5% is the percentage rate of growth. Okay, so if, for example, the example here I give, your country GDP is 100 billion, and let's say on average over the past few years, the growth rate of GDP is 5%. Okay, so if for example, in year 1, your GDP is 100 billion. Okay, if it's a 5% increase in year 2, it would be 105 billion. Right? So, and then if it's another 5% increase, so it's 105 times 100 times 105. No, 105 over 100. 105 over 100. Which is that? So this will be, in year 2, it will be 100. And in year 3, it will be, 110.25. Okay. And then if it's another 5%, then you can calculate. Okay. 105 over 100. So over the years, if it's 5%, the GDP numbers will increase, okay, by that number. And basically the rule of 70 is just saying you can calculate how long it will take for the number, this 100 billion, to become double its value. Okay, so double its value is 200 billion. So you can calculate 70 over the annual percentage rate of growth. Okay, so here basically it will take 14 years for the value of GDP to become double. Okay, so that's just something that we it's good to know, but in theory, of course, we'll see later. We'll see later on. We'll look into GDP much deeper later on. The annual percentage rate of growth isn't consistent. So sometimes it goes up, sometimes it goes down. Okay, and depending on the country, some countries have a high growth rate, some countries have a very low growth rate. Okay, so yeah, so just get to know a bit about growth in the beginning here. Okay, so if we look at some figures, okay, if you look at here the example of GDP in the United States. Okay, so why do we focus on the United States? Because it is an economy that can influence other economies in the world. Okay, so if we look at growth in United States from 1950 to 2015, it has increased sevenfold. Okay, so this is around 65 years. Yeah, and the average increase in growth rate is 3.1% per year. Okay, so for example, if in 1950 the GDP, just an example, GDP was 100 billion. Okay, in 2015, now the GDP is 700 billion because it is a sevenfold increase. Okay, and on average every year it increased by 3.1%. Okay, and then however, okay, there is another figure that we also look at, which is GDP per capita. Okay, so GDP per capita is basically GDP over the population. Okay, so you can think about it maybe in terms of a pie or a cake, right? So if you have a big cake, so maybe you can say that US and China has big cakes. Okay, however, when you divide this cake into the population, okay, they have a lot of population and each person only gets a small slice. Okay, especially when it comes to China, although the economy is big, when you divide the cake for each person, actually the GDP per capita is quite low. Okay, and basically the figure in the United States is that GDP per capita increased only threefold. Okay, so if for example one person GDP per capita is 1,000 in 1950, in 2015 it is only 3,000. Okay, and this is only an increase of 2% per year. Okay, so there is a difference. Basically there is a difference between GDP and GDP per capita. Right? So the increase in GDP may not result to a increase in GDP per capita. Okay, and basically this relates to the concept of well-being as well. Okay, so although the country is growing in terms of GDP, in terms of wealth, right? So if you look at GDP, is actually also a measure of financial value or wealth, right? However, it may not translate to the well-being of the citizens in the country. Okay, so therefore, although the GDP has increased, you have to also include other aspects that may not be captured by GDP, right? So for example, there is maybe also improved products and services, right? So when you compare 1950 to 2015, of course, there are a lot of improvements in terms of products and services, especially when it comes to technology. Okay, and then there may also be added leisure in terms of how we work. Previously, maybe it was hard to work, but later on, there was more leisure. Okay, and then there's also other impacts that comes with growth, especially related to healthcare, mental health care, and then stress, right? So these are also other factors that basically, although there is growth, but it is not captured in GDP. Okay, so there is also, yeah, so this is basically the figure in terms of real GDP per capita. Okay, real GDP and real GDP per capita in the US. Okay, so because when we see okay, so this is the real figures. When we see the figures in US 1950, here is 2 trillion. Okay, so the real GDP in US in 1950 is 2 trillion. However, the population is 152 million. Okay. And in 2015, okay, you have GDP of 16 trillion. Okay, so I don't know, this is, yeah, sevenfold, they say, increased by sevenfold. However, if you look at GDP per capita in 1950, it's 14.63 thousand, 14,638. Okay, meaning to say that if you divide this figure with this figure, each person will get 14,000 on average, let's say. Okay. And in 2015, each person will, if you divide this figure with the population, you will get this figure, 50,000. Okay. Although this is an increase, however, if you look at the comparison between the increase in real GDP and real GDP per capita, this is around 8 times maybe. This is only around 3 times. Okay, so there is a disparity because although the GDP increase, you have to also factor in how much is the population. Okay, so you can say that increase in GDP does not correlate with increase with GDP per capita. Okay, it's not necessarily the same. Okay, so however, for me, if you want to see the real or more accurate representation of the effects of GDP towards representation of GDP towards the individual in the country, you should look at GDP per capita, because this represents how much each person gets the slice of the cake. Okay, so this is more accurate, I think, in terms of comparison. So when we look at the modern economic growth in terms of how we calculate GDP, okay, how we eventually how we evolved in terms of the society, and eventually settled down to calculating GDP or growth as it is right now. Okay, so basically, the modern economic system started in the 1700s after the Industrial Revolution. Okay, so before this, we did not have any clear concept of economics. We did not have any supply or demand. We did not have all these theories in terms of price, in terms of fiscal policy, monetary policy, how money is created. We did not have that. Okay, only after the Industrial Revolution in 1700s, then we started to have all these theories, and we started to measure growth, and in terms of how we improve our living standards. Okay, so this is where the scholars back then started to look at improving our living standards. So we had economists that started to measure living standards, started to measure time for leisure, and then of course later on in terms of the society, they looked at how the society changed. So we had also various periods of capitalism. Okay, after the Industrial Revolution, it was all about capitalism, because the Industrial Revolution started to develop machines like the printing machine, the steam engine, and then the factories, right? So this was an era of growth during this time, especially in the West, right? However, this was also an era of capitalism, because the workers were working okay, working, but the owners of capital get the profit. Okay, so the workers were working in the factories in a very dire condition. They're working hard, right? But the profit usually will be benefited by the owners of the capital. And then because of this, we saw another social change that happened, right? And because of uh, the workers were dissatisfied with what happened, then we saw the evolution of socialism. Okay? Now we want to see that the workers get their fair share of the profit. Okay, and a more extreme version in terms of communism, where the state takes over the capital. Okay, and of course this led to one thing over another, and eventually we saw the rise of the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany, right? So and basically there were countries that were um, implementing socialism and communism, and countries that were implementing capitalism. But eventually, one system prevailed, which is the capitalism system, and the socialism system collapsed. Okay, for many reasons, including the war played a factor as well. But currently, we see capitalism prevailing. Okay, and basically, what comes with capitalism is the free market as well. Okay, and with this as well, we see democracy. Okay, where because people are more free, and as a result, after the Industrial Revolution, we saw human lifespan also double, and this is where the era of we started to measure our progress. Okay, yeah, and the argument is that the modern economic growth in terms of how we measure growth began in Britain, in the UK, and spread slowly. And you can argue this is because of colonialism. So when they colonized many countries around the world, they started to spread their ideologies and how the system should work. And basically, the factor of colonialism also influenced the different living standards of countries around the world. Okay, because if you look at the colonizing countries, now they are in Europe, right? They are the most developed countries, and one of the factors is because they colonized other countries and took away the resources from these countries and bring it back to their land. Okay, and now they become the leader countries. Okay, and we because of this, there's also the difference in the living standards in developed countries and the developing countries. Okay, so the leader countries invent technology, and the follower countries adopt technology. However, the theory is that when over time, because of the globalization and interconnectedness and technology, the follower country can grow faster because they do not have to to allocate too much resources in terms of research and development, but just adopt the existing technology. And because of that, if you look at the data, the growth rate of developing countries is much higher than developed countries. Okay, because they are trying to catch up the gap between these countries. Okay. Yeah, so if you look at some figures, let me just open this one. So here, this is the figure of real GDP per capita in 2010. Right, so there is differences, right? So here, for example, in United States, GDP per capita is almost 15,000. In 1960, GDP per capita is almost 15,000. In 2010, 41,000. Average annual growth rate 2.1%. Okay, and then you can see there are differences in terms of growth rates for different countries. And modern economic growth rate, if you look at starting point, right? When you have the starting point in 1820, it is almost the same. Okay, in terms of Europe and Asia and Africa, is the same, right? And when you see the growth rate, right, and because of colonialism, you saw the United States and Europe increasing much faster. Okay. However, yeah, the countries in Asia and Africa are still catching up. Okay, when you compare this GDP per capita. Okay, I wanted to show you the figures. Okay, so you can compare the figures. So in here, okay, yeah. So if you go to World Bank, you can get the numbers. So if you compare the GDP growth, yeah. So Malaysia, you can see that it has a higher GDP growth rate than United States. Okay. However, you can see the trend. Basically, you can see when United States goes down, Malaysia also goes down. When United States go up, Malaysia also go up. Okay, so this is basically United States influencing other countries, right? So if you look at, can you see Africa? Sub-Saharan Africa. Sub-Saharan Africa also follow the similar trend. And yeah, Sub-Saharan Africa is the red one here. And if you look at the growth rate is also higher than United States, but they follow the similar trend. Okay. So you can play around with this. Okay. Play around with the data. Okay, so if you look, for example, if you follow the news, okay, so this is news last year. Basically, you can see that many times when you open the business and economic section, they will talk about GDP. They will say 4.9%. Okay, so yeah, they will say the percentage, and then for example, they have the forecast of GDP. Okay, and then this one they say Malaysia's economy remains en route to recovery. Forecast for GDP rebounds in 2021 from 6.5% now to 7.5%. Okay, so this is the quotation, especially when you look at the news, is basically in percentage, but they do not show the real number. Okay, they do not show how much by a trillion or a billion. It's all in percentage. Okay, so the percentage is the one that is important to understand. Okay, because basically it's if it is 100 billion during this year and the forecast is 4.9%, for example. Okay, so if Malaysia, let's say in 2019 was 100 billion. So the forecast in 2020 is 4.9%. So you add 4.9% out of 100 billion is basically in 2020, the forecast is 104.9 billion. Okay, so similarly, sorry, so this one is not an increase. This is a contraction. So contraction is negative. Okay, so you have to minus 4.9%. So this was happening during the pandemic. So basically, if in 2019 100 billion, if it is a contraction, then you minus 4.9%. Then basically in 2020, the figure is 95.1 billion. Okay, and I think you can see the figures. Try to see the figures. What happened during 2020? So everyone basically, can we see world? So you can see in 2020, basically the figures was all negative growth. So all the economy in the world, we had negative growth. Right? So our economy basically reduced in terms of consumption, investment, government spending, and also net exports. Okay, because of the pandemic. Okay, so this is the figures that we can see. Okay, so but on average, East Asia only contracted by negative 0.1. In Sub-Saharan Africa, negative 2. United States, negative 3. Europe, almost 6% contraction. Okay. Okay, so hopefully when you read the news, or if you see any headlines, you can understand what it actually means. Okay. So this was the figures in Malaysia last year. So it is quite unfortunate because we had a negative growth. Okay, although other countries saw positive growth. Okay, so I think this was also because of our reliance on United States and also oil during that time. So there are various factors that can influence growth. Okay, so these are some of the factors. Okay, so number one is in terms of strong property rights. So if you want growth in your country, you have to have strong property rights in order for the people or the industries to create. And when you create and have that, especially intellectual property, right? Or even private property, then you have that individual motivation to invest, right? So then it can contribute to the economy as a whole. Okay, and then secondly, you have to have patents and copyrights. So when you invent something, then that can be used to progress technology. Number three is efficient financial institutions. This also provides the liquidity and also access for people to have money to invest and spend. Okay, and then you also have to have literacy and widespread education, so that people can have a higher level of education, have higher skills, and then contribute to the economy. And also free trade, so that people can easily buy and sell things, and also because of that you have better exports and imports, right? And then competitive market system, this also influence growth. Okay, and then another influencing factor of growth, you can argue, it was because of colonialism. Okay, colonialism was a very significant factor, especially when it comes to the growth that we see nowadays in Europe and Western countries. So for example here, the headline from Al Jazeera was about how Britain stole 45 trillion from India. So this is only from India, but if you look at the Commonwealth Empire, how hundreds of countries were colonized by Britain, and basically they took away a lot of resources. Okay. Yeah, so there are various determinants of growth. Okay. We have the supply factors. So the supply factors basically are related to the natural resources. They are related to the human resources, and also capital goods, okay, supply of stocks, and then improvement in technology. So you look at, basically, you can reflect back to your country. Okay, what are the resources, or what are the factors that we have? Okay, so it's not enough that you have good quantity of natural resources. You also have to have a good quality. And in order to extract these natural resources, you have to also have good human resources. So do you have that capacity to extract? Okay, or can you extract in a sustainable way? Okay, so if you extract today, can the future generation benefit, or will it destroy the environment? Okay, so you need that human resources as well. And then what are the existing stocks that you have in capital goods? Okay, and also what is the technology? So all this can influence your consumption, can influence your investment, can influence government spending, and also net exports. Okay, and then you also have demand factor. Okay, so that was supply factor, and also, so now you have demand factor and efficiency factor. So demand factor is basically how much does the players in the economy demand for the goods, right? So because uh, we have the supply, we have the supply. So now was the supply. So we have the price, we have the quantity, right? And now, how about the demand? Okay, so if we have a higher demand, then we can have higher output quantity, right? So this depends on the households, depends on the business, depends on the government. Okay, so households basically usually relate to the C part, consumption. Okay, how much do we consume? Okay, so if we spend more in a country, so if the people in the country spend, then it can influence the level of consumption in that country, right? So it's better for you to have more consumption. Okay, and then secondly, in terms of investment, okay, so this is related to businesses. How much do businesses invest? So this can be local businesses or foreign businesses that come to invest in our country. And then finally, in terms of how much does the government spend? Government spending. Okay, so from the tax that they collect, how much do they spend? Okay, each year from the budget. Okay, so these are the demand factors. And then another factor is in terms of how efficient are your resources. Okay, how do you use your resources efficiently? For example, if you have many workers, but if they are not efficient, then they are not producing efficient output. Okay, or for example, if you look at government um, offices, for example, okay, there are many workers, but the workers are not doing anything. So are they efficient? Are they providing the output or not? Okay, and then another part is in terms of full employment. So in your labor market, in your labor force, for example, if you have a labor force of 50% of your population. Okay, so Malaysia, we have around 32 million population, but the people in the labor force is around 15 million, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, so around 50%. So how much of this 15 million is actually working? How many are working? Okay, so this is basically a resource. Okay, so if we can efficiently use this 15 million, then you can say that it is fully employed. All these 15 million people are fully employed. Okay, so this is also another factor that can influence the growth of a country. Okay, so when you look at this, basically growth is correlated to the production possibility of that country, right? So if you invest in capital goods and consumer goods, you can see the output. Okay, so this is where basically the potential output that can be produced in a certain country. Okay. So this is just We can skip this. So this is just looking at how much does labor contribute towards the GDP, and this is related to labor productivity. So some countries, they measure the labor productivity. So you have the numbers of labor, for example, in Malaysia, 15 million, but how productive is the labor? So that's another factor that contributes to the real GDP. Okay. Yeah, so and then when you look at the factors that would influence growth, so there are different factors, and depending on the country, these factors may have different percentages. Right? So if you have, for example, for this country, the technological advancement, it contributes 40% towards growth. Quantity of capital contributes 30%. Education and training contributes 15%. Economies and scale and resource allocation 15%. So there are different factors that may contribute towards the growth of the country, right? So if you are in government, then maybe you have to see what is actually the factors that we can improve in order to improve our growth, right? So maybe we have a lot of resources, natural resources especially, but how do we efficiently use these natural resources? Because we do not have the skills, we do not have the human resources, then we have to have education and training. So we have to invest more in education and training in order to train and get the human resources that is needed to extract sustainably our natural resources, right? So this is the fact, the things that we have to think about when it comes to policy. Okay. Yeah. So here, for example, one aspect is in terms of education. So this is, I think, the PISA scores. I think PISA scores. So they measure the level of mathematics and science in certain countries, right? And this basically reflects their human resources. Okay, so they can measure the human resources in that country, and basically currently Singapore and South Korea and Taiwan and Japan, they have these the students are tested and they are among the top 5 usually in terms of the PISA scores. Okay. So yeah, so this relates very much to the productivity of labor. Okay, so when you have students or kids that are brilliant in terms of science and mathematics in school, then eventually when they grow up, they will become productive and affect the output of the labor and eventually contribute towards the economic growth. Okay. Just. Okay, and then there is also various factors that may decrease productivity of a country. Okay, for example, if there is high debt level, okay, so if the household debt, okay, I think especially when you look at the figures, you look at the household debt figures, whereby you calculate how much is each person having debt. Okay, so then you can see how much of their money is actually being used for consumption and how much of their money is actually being used to pay debt. Okay, so when you pay debt, then you are no longer productive. Okay, and then you have over capacity. Okay, when you have too many workers. Okay, and then because of that, the output in the factory per person will also be reduced because there's too many workers but too little machine, and eventually some workers may not actually contribute. Okay, and then this one, I think the example is because if in the market, okay, so if you look at the market, right, so if you look the market for apps, so there are various apps, right? So if a person makes an app and sells it in the App Store, right, or the Google Play Store, for a certain price, so he has motivation to create that app. However, when somebody else also creates a similar app but he gives it for free in the marketplace, right? So then it would demotivate other people from producing more. So in terms of the app, okay, in terms of app development, they wouldn't be motivated to develop more apps. Okay. Okay, and then another reason for slowdown in productivity is because of slowdown in technological progress. So this can be in various reasons, and we saw this during the pandemic, perhaps because of the disruption of supply chain. Okay, because in some countries, for example, I think in China, especially when the pandemic happened and they had a lockdown, so the components, the technological components that is needed in other countries was not delivered. So this was also a factor that caused a slowdown in the global economy. Okay. Yeah, and then if you want to look at another factor that influences growth is in terms of basically they look at global competitiveness index. Okay, so this competitiveness index looks at various factors such as innovativeness, capability to transfer technology, efficiency of financial system, rates of investment, and degree of economic integration. Okay, and this basically would influence economic growth as well. Okay, so if you want to see the potential of a country, you can see through the competitiveness index. Okay, so this was the competitiveness index back in 2015-2016. So this is the I think the recent one. Okay, so the recent one, competitiveness index, the most competitive country is Singapore. Okay, so this is in terms of these factors I mentioned just now, in terms of innovativeness, transfer technology, financial system, rate of investment, degree of economic integration. Okay, so Singapore is number 1, followed by United States, followed by Hong Kong. Malaysia is 27. Okay, so in terms of competitiveness. Okay, so despite all this that I have mentioned, okay, there are also issues, especially more recently, when it comes to whether growth is actually desirable, because the argument is that growth may also come with disruption or destruction, okay, whereby when you want to achieve growth, you also have to take away or destroy environment and resources, okay, especially when it comes to natural resources, right? So if you want to have growth, you want to export, for example, metal or natural natural gas or petrol. So you have to go into the environment and basically take it out from the ground, and this may cause the destruction to environment as well. Okay, so another aspect is in terms of growth, but also in terms of disparity. Let me pause for a while. Okay, so this sorry, so this basically relates to disparity and inequality. Okay, so although there is growth, but there is also inequality in terms of the gap between the rich and the poor. Okay, so with growth, especially in the capitalist system, there's also a very big gap between the rich and the poor, and it doesn't address the issues, especially for the most vulnerable in the society. Okay. However, when you look at the arguments for growth, okay, in defense of growth, overall, basically, when you look at the statistics, growth also comes with a higher living standard, and also we also have a higher intellectual capacity in terms of imagination and technology to solve environmental and resources issue. Okay, because of growth, now we see the movement in terms of sustainability and also technology. Okay, renewable technology in terms of solar, wind, okay, electric vehicles. Okay, so these are also comes with growth as well. Okay, so yeah, so here yeah, so economic growth also is a path for greater material abundance. Okay, and because the aspect is that in terms of conventional economics is that we have um, uh, scarcity, right? We have limited resources and scarcity. So there's no, our resources are limited. So, however, because of the growth, especially in terms of technology, the argument is that we can have a lot more resources, okay, greater material abundance, and this can be distributed to the population. Okay, and of course, this will result in higher standards of living. And because of that as well, in terms of, especially in terms of technology, as technology evolves, the need for human labor is no longer as the need for human labor is no longer as important as before. Okay, so you do not need to work too long over time. Okay, so this provides more time for leisure. Okay, and this also basically allows for expansion and application of human knowledge. So when people are spend less time working, maybe they have more time to do research and read, for example. Okay, so this is the argument for growth. Okay, so one aspect that I think is especially important in the Western countries, in developed countries, is that the fear is that they have a population decline. Okay, so they have a population decline for various reasons, because they are working and they desire less children. So the issue is that if you look at the social structure of these countries, right? So you have the percentage, right? If you look at the percentage, so the elderly is a big portion of the population, and the young people is very small portion. Okay, so the issue is that this portion are not working, so they are not contributing towards the growth. However, the young people are working, and the issue is that uh, there are many social structure or resources that must be allocated in order to take care of the elderly. Okay, especially in terms of health resources, right? So the government has to allocate a certain budget to fund healthcare for the elderly, and so this usually is taken up from the tax that they collect from the young people that are working. Okay, so the issue is that currently in many developed countries, because of the population decline, okay, and basically the elder people, when they were working 20 to 30 years back, they had less children, right? So the fertility rate was low back then. So when they had less children, now the result show, okay, the population is declining, and because of that, it may also affect the growth rate of a country. Okay, so you see many developed countries, the growth rate is, in terms of the percentage, is low. Okay, so each generation is smaller than the one before. Okay, but of course this is not true for, I think, Africa and also some ASEAN countries. It is actually going bigger. Okay, so but overall in the globe, in the world, there's actually an issue of population decline. Okay, even in Malaysia, I think the growth, our figures is around 1.8. This fertility rate in Malaysia, I think 1.8. Meaning to say, for each couple, for each two people, they are only producing 1.8 children. Right, so this will affect the country over time, and if you go 20 to 30 years further, this will result to a decrease in population overall and an aging population. Okay, so this is basically related to social security issue, where you have to spend more, and also innovation and productivity, because the elderly are not innovative and they are not productive, so they are just retired, and they just basically leisure and enjoy their retirement. Okay, so this is the issue that is related to growth. Okay, and actually there's one, okay, there's also one video that, or maybe I can give you as a homework. So yeah, so this is a homework for you. Okay, when it comes to growth, yeah, so just watch these videos. Number one here is an alternative to GDP. Okay, how do we measure GDP and focus on well-being? And then why governments should prioritize well-being. Number three here, New Zealand focusing on well-being. Okay, number four, recovery from the pandemic, balancing short and long-term concerns. Okay, so this is your homework. You can watch it at your own time, and I think hopefully it can help you to understand growth a bit better. Okay, so this is all for this topic. Any questions before I move to the next topic?
Yes, Doctor.
Yes.
In the case of improvement of technology, when the technology can do what people are supposed to, that isn't this will cause unemployment rate to increase?
Technology, yeah, okay. So that's a good statement. That's a good point. But if we look at the historical development, right? We always had improvements in terms of technology. Okay, so the argument is that, the counter argument to your statement is that because you were saying that if technology increase, unemployment will also increase because the technology will replace the workers, right? So the counter argument for this is basically, if you look at the historical development of technology and human civilization, is that yes, technology will replace certain sectors of the economy, but at the same time, it will also create new sectors in the economy. Okay, for example, in terms of I think there is one figure that I think I can share with you. In terms of the current development, whereby what are the countries that, what are the jobs that are no longer relevant. Let me just share this in the WhatsApp group, and I'll share in the screen. And so yeah, so one argument is that when we have new technology, the technology will replace the jobs, right? But it will also create new ones, right? So for example, now there is the movement away from oil and gas. right? So if you want to replace oil and gas, uh, it will cause people to lose their jobs, right? However, we see new industries like green, renewables that will shift these workers and provide new employment opportunities. Okay, so this is, yeah, so this, hopefully you can see this. Okay, so this is over the next decade. Okay, over the next decade, the 20 fastest growing and declining jobs, and I think hopefully you can be aware of this as well. Huh? Yeah, so this is the, I think this is the declining jobs, and this is the salary. This is the salary. These are the increasing jobs. Okay, fastest growing jobs are on the top here. The lower ones are the declining jobs. Okay, so here, in terms of, yeah, if you are a telemarketer, you will no longer be relevant in the next decade. Print binding finishing workers. So this is machines will replace you. Door-to-door salesmen, cutters, trimmers, data entry keyers, parking officers, telephone operators, switchboard operators, order clerks, timing device assemblers, adjusters. So these are all the works that will no longer be relevant in the next decade. Okay. However, these jobs will be replaced by these opportunities. Okay, so this will basically, there will always be new employment opportunities with the advance of technology, unless we reach a point where we no longer need any human work, human labor, and you see this in some movies. I think Wall-E, if you've seen Wall-E, right? Wall-E, the Disney or Pixar cartoon, right? So that in that movie, humans no longer work. Everything is done by robots, including food and entertainment. All is that by robots. Okay, but here we see basically what are the potential growing jobs in the next decade, right? And this is, you can see this is the annual salary. So if you are interested, basically most of it are in the health related. Okay, the blue one is health related. Okay, and the what is this? I don't know the color. The color peach one is computer and mathematical. The green one is production. Purple, office and admin. So basically, office and admin will no longer be relevant. Okay, in the next decade. Okay, but the opportunity will come in terms of the healthcare. Okay, so if you are in the health industry, this is where you will see growth in terms of jobs. Okay, and if you want to get a high salary, you can see here the physician assistants, nurse practitioners will get high salary. Service, health and medical service managers, actuaries, statistician, data scientists, information security analysts. Okay, so these are the jobs that will basically grow and provide the opportunity for the labor market. Okay, so hopefully that answers the question.
Yes, Doctor.
Okay, any other question? Okay, so I'll move to the next slide. Yeah. Okay, so the next slide looks at business cycles, unemployment, and also inflation. Okay, so these are what you can say headline keywords when it comes to macroeconomics. Okay, so we'll go by the topics one by one. Okay, so in terms of business cycle, okay, so business cycle, perhaps you will encounter this word in the news, or if you read journals, or if you listen to the business and economic news, right? So you will encounter this word, okay, business cycle. And the definition is basically it is an alternating increase and decrease in economic activity over time. Okay, increase and decrease of economic activity over time. And some argue it is because of the system that we are operating in. Okay, the capitalist system or fiat money system, where it is fueled by debt. And because of this, we will always see increase, decrease, increase, decrease. And this is basically represented by 4 phases, okay, of a economy. Okay, you will see economy at a peak, and then after it reaches its peak, it will go through a recession, and then it will go through a throw, okay, and then finally it will expand back again. Okay, and then once it expands, it will go back to peak again. Okay, and then it will go to recession, through expansion, and then go back again. Okay, so this is the business cycle. Okay, and if you look at the trend, like I mentioned like I showed just now, where is it? The World Bank. Yeah, so this one, okay, so this one basically you can see probably see 2 cycles here. Okay, so this was the cycle of recession back in 2008, 2010, from the global financial crisis, okay, this area, and there was a recovery, okay, and then however it went back down. Okay, so this is around 10 years. Okay, and here also in early 2000 was also going down here, okay, and then go back up. So this was also, the gap was also around 10 years as well. Okay, and if you go back over the past 100 years, you can see the trend is actually around 10 years, we will face another recession. Okay, so the recession usually around 10 years cycle. Okay, but this one we cannot pull back. Okay, but you can see the trend from United States here. And here basically in 2000 we had the dot-com bubble. The dot-com bubble. In 2009 we had the global financial crisis, and here we had the pandemic. However, even before the pandemic happened, there was already a decline. There was already a trend of declining. Okay, if you look at 2008 to 2018 to 2019, the trend was already going down. Okay, so here also in the EU, 2017, 2018, 2019, it was also already going down. So the pandemic actually was just what you call igniting the recession further. Okay, so making it worse. Okay, but even without the pandemic, we were already facing a recession. Okay, during this period. Okay, so this is basically a representation of the business cycle. Okay, to see it more clearly, see here. Okay, so it's basically over time we will see peak recession, through expansion, peak recession, through expansion. Okay, and now we can argue currently in 2022, you can argue that we have faced the recession and we are currently in the phase of here. Yes, here, and hopefully we can see in the next few years the expansion of all the countries around the world. Okay, but around 10 years you will see again recession happening. Okay, so this is just basically a result of the system that we are currently operating in. Yeah, so this is the table that shows the recessions that happen in the US. Okay, so from 2007, 2009, 2001, 1990, 1980, 1970, 1960, 1950. So around that roughly. Okay, and then however, you have different durations of the recession. So the different duration, it basically represents how long are you stuck in the recession period. Okay, so how long are you going down? Okay, so here at different periods, you have different recessions. Right? So currently in 2019, 2020, 2021, 22, okay, I think until 2021, maybe around 2 years, we had our recession, okay, whereby there was a decline in real output globally. Okay, so this is basically the business cycle, and we basically you can predict basically there will be growth over the next few years, and around 10 years you have to prepare for another recession, right? So if you are you can link this to the stock market, then you know where to invest your money. Okay, yeah, so basically the business cycle will also come with economic shocks. Right? So economic shocks, there are various factors. Previously there was the mortgage-backed securities that caused the global financial crisis, so that was the economic shock. Currently we had the economic shock in the form of
I'm not hearing your voice.
Sorry, how about others? Can you hear my voice? Can others hear my? Is it clear?
Yes, doctor. Yeah, it's clear.
Okay. Okay, so yeah, so we had the economic shocks. Okay, and basically yes, so the business cycles come with economic shocks, and the current economic shock, you can argue, is coming from the lockdowns. Okay, so in China right now, they are also having a lockdown, and this caused a disruption in terms of the supply chain. So they cannot export and import things, and movement of resources are restricted. Okay, so that's also a cause of economic shocks. And then another aspect that can be considered when it comes to business cycle is the factor of price stickiness. So price stickiness is basically saying that although the economy has become worse, although people are buying less, prices do not go down. Prices do not go down. Okay, so they usually remain the same until a very, very long period. Only then will the people or the sellers change the price. Okay, so this is a factor that also affects the economic output. Okay, because when prices do not are not flexible enough, okay, in terms, we've learned this about when it comes to price elasticity, right? So if price does not react to the demand or does not react to the supply, then it will not be efficient, and the output basically, if the demand goes down, the price does not change, then there will be a lot of surplus in the economy. So when there is a surplus, then this is a form of economic inefficiency, and this will of course affect the economic growth of the country. Okay, so yeah, so when this happens, usually there will be a decrease in output and also decrease in employment. So decrease in employment is basically unemployment. Okay, there are many causes of shocks in the economy. Okay, so maybe in terms of irregular innovation, in terms of productivity changes, there are monetary factors. For example, in monetary factors, you can say in terms of in Southeast Asia, we had this ASEAN financial crisis. Okay, so this was back in 1998, 97, 98, ASEAN financial crisis, which affected Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, so the countries around ASEAN, related to our currencies. And yeah, so this was also an economic shock that caused economic recession in our countries. And also, this was also related, political events was may also cause shocks. Okay, so maybe a coup happened, government changes suddenly, government collapse. So this may also cause shocks to the economy and also cause financial instability. Okay, and most recently we had a pandemic that also caused the shocks. Okay, and these shocks will have cyclical impact. So cyclical impact is basically, cyclical is just a fancy word to say it goes up and down. Okay, so it has impact to different goods have different impacts. Okay, so when it comes to shocks, the durable goods will be affected the most. So these are the things that have a due date. Okay, so the due date, because you have a due date, you have to send it or distribute it very fast. If not, it will be affected. Okay, so these are the things that will affect the most, especially in terms of capital goods that have due dates and also consumer goods that have due dates. For example, if you have vegetable farm, right, and then suddenly you cannot sell your vegetables, right? So this will cause a very high shock to your business, and this will of course impact the economy. Okay, and non-durable goods will be affected less. So in terms of services and food and clothing that has high long due date. Okay, so then they can last longer. Okay, so this is in terms of business cycle. Okay, so these are something that you have to be aware of, business cycle. Is there any questions before I move to the next part in terms of unemployment for business cycle? Okay, the next part is in terms of unemployment. Okay, so this is usually very much related to recession. So when a recession happens, remember recession is when the economy goes down. Okay, when the economy goes down, this is where the economic recession happens, and this correlates with high level of unemployment. So when the economy is not doing well, many businesses will not do well. They will get less revenue, get less profit, and they may have to lay off their workers. So many people will lose their jobs. Okay, so this is unemployment. Okay, so how unemployment is calculated? Okay, so this is an example in the US. In the US, I think this was the figure in 2015. Okay, so the total population of US is 321.4 million. Okay, out of the total population, this is the percentage of people who are under 16 or are in jail, institutionalized. So it's a fancy word for people who are locked in jail. So around 70 million are not officially workers. So if you are under 16 in the US, you cannot work yet. So you have to go to school. Okay. And then out of the total population as well, there are also people who are not in labor force. So these are people who are the elderly or disabled. They are not able to work in the US. So this is around 94.1 million. Okay. So out of that, there are 157.8 million who are what we call the labor force. So these are the people who are willing and able to work. Okay, so they must be willing and they must be able to work. Okay. And out of this labor force, okay, basically out of the 160 million that want to work, 8 million cannot work. 8 million cannot find a job. Okay, so these are the people who are unemployed. Okay, so in order to calculate the unemployment rate, you have to get the number of people who are unemployed over the labor force times 100. Okay, so in this case, the unemployment rate in the US during this time is 7.9 million over 157.8 million times 100. So the unemployment rate is 5%. Okay, so this is the unemployment rate here, 5% here. Okay. Yeah, so there are some criticisms on, actually I just skip this one. Okay, so there are different categories of people who are unemployed. Okay, so there are people who are frictionally unemployed, structurally unemployed, and cyclically unemployed. So the people who are frictionally unemployed are the people who are job hopping. Okay, so they have quit their job and then now they want to find another job. Okay, so maybe they want to take a break for a while. They're tired of they have a burnout and they want to take a break for 1 month and then they are looking for another job. So this is called frictional unemployment. Okay. Another part of unemployment is structural unemployment. So this is unemployment that is caused by changes in the structure of the demand for labor. Okay, so this is, I think, related to the picture that I showed just now in terms of industries that are no longer relevant. Okay, so some industries, some sectors in the job market may no longer structurally be relevant, and therefore these people are unemployed because of that. Okay, because that industry is no longer hiring people, so therefore they are structurally unemployed. So now they have to shift to a different sector. Okay, and then thirdly, there is the cyclical unemployment, which is usually because of recession. Okay, so because of recession, many businesses, maybe they have to cut some workers, but after they recover, then they can hire more people maybe. So this is cyclical unemployment. Okay, if times are good, then usually this unemployment category does not happen. Okay, so usually this only happens during the recession period. Okay, so in other periods there are frictional and structural unemployment. Okay, you look at, yeah, so this is the figure. I forgot to update this, but anyway, in Malaysia we have the Department of Statistics. Okay, we have the Department of Statistics that collect the figures in terms of unemployment and labor force. Okay, but basically, yeah, they would report the unemployment rate over quarters. Okay, and you can see Malaysia's unemployment rate is actually comparatively quite low. Okay, over time, the highest we had unemployment was around 4%. Okay, 4.2%. Okay, but of course, I think during the pandemic we reached around 4.5%. Okay. Yeah, so here we have the figures in terms of, yeah, 4. Yeah, here in 2021 we had around 4.5% unemployment. Okay, so this was quite high historically. Okay. What else? So they also provide the definition in terms of labor force, outside labor force, employed, unemployed, unemployment rate, and labor force participation. So you can see this in the Department of Statistics website. So this is another aspect that I want to highlight for all of you, because although we have employment figures and unemployment figures, but another figure that we have to be aware of is the figure or the data of underemployment. Okay, underemployment is different from unemployment. Okay, so underemployment, the definition is underemployment occurs when a person does not work full time or take jobs that does not reflect their actual training and financial needs. Okay, that is, their job doesn't use all their skills and education or provide less than full-time work. Okay, for example, a master's student that graduated from IIBF becomes a Grab driver. Right, so this basically, in terms of the statistics, he is employed. However, his work does not reflect his qualification, right? Or an engineer that sells food at a pasar malam, right? So he is trained as an engineer. The skills that he has is as an engineer. He has a degree in engineering. However, he works in a job that does not require his skills and training. So although he is categorized as employed, this is basically considered as underemployed. Okay, so there are different underemployment categories. Yeah, so here, for example, skilled workers who are working in low income jobs. Right? So if you have a master's degree or a degree and you become a Grab delivery driver, for example. So this is, you have the skills for a higher income job, but you are working in low income job. Okay, and then skilled workers in jobs that do not fully utilize their skills. Okay, or part-time workers who would rather work full-time. These are people who are underemployed. Okay, so there are visible underemployment and invisible underemployment. So visible comprise of employees who work fewer hours than what is considered normal. Okay, they possess the skill to work in a full-time position but are unable to find regular employment. Okay, so they usually work part-time. Invisible unemployment refers to people who work in jobs that do not utilize their skills, okay, such as financial analyst working as a waiter in a restaurant. Okay, so this is very difficult to measure and it requires extensive research and surveys. However, this is, I think, a very pressing issue that needs to be looked at for the government to correct the situation, because when you look at it, basically you have trained many people to have these skills, but you do not provide the structure of the economy that can provide the jobs that are match the graduates, right? So this is I think something that is pressing no matter what country it is. Okay, so if you are in a position of influence or a position of power in the future, hopefully you can look into this issue. Okay, so this happened, especially it was quite true during the pandemic, okay, whereby these people, for example, had all the skills. So for example, this pilot, he can drive an aeroplane, but the skills is no longer required during the pandemic, right? So now he became a delivery man. Okay, and then this pilot opens a food stall, and this the founder of Asia also becomes a food delivery driver during this time. Okay, so these are some examples. Okay, yeah, so there are the economic cost of unemployment. Okay, so when the labor force is not utilized fully, okay, so it is as if you have the resources, but you are not using these resources. You have the people who have these skills, but you are not using this. Okay, so it will affect the economy as a whole. Okay, so if you are not using it, you can calculate GDP gap, which is what is the actual GDP that is produced by the country minus what is the potential GDP that can actually be achieved by the country. So it can be negative or positive. Okay, and this is related in economic theory. We have what we call the Okun's law. So what Okun did is that he analyzed the different countries, and from the data, he managed to come up with this theory whereby if there is unemployment, if there is basically the summary is that for every 1% of cyclical unemployment, there will be 2% GDP gap. Okay, so this will be basically a loss of 2%. Okay, if you have 1% unemployment, 2% GDP gap will happen. Okay, so if you have 2% unemployment, then there will be 4% GDP gap. So it will be double the gap. Okay. Yeah. So if you look at the cycles, okay. So based on the unemployment and GDP, so this is the actual GDP that happened in the US. Okay, but this is the potential GDP. So this area is the gap, which is basically a loss because of the unemployment, because you are not using your resources. Therefore, actually, these people are not contributing to the economy. Okay, and therefore, this was actually the potential for them, but because they are unemployed, they have the gap here. Okay, so this is something that can be considered, and currently, some proposals have been made in terms of economic theory on how you can address this. For example, you have what we call the jobs guarantee scheme. So jobs guarantee scheme is basically the government will guarantee that everyone in the labor force will have a job no matter what the economic situation is. Okay, so you can shift, for example, if people who are laid off during the recession, you can then shift these people into more productive jobs. So the government will provide these jobs. Okay, so these are some proposal. Okay, new development. Okay, so if you're interested in this, you can research on the jobs guarantee scheme. Yeah, and yeah, this is in the US. Okay, so in terms of unemployment, basically there is unequal burdens according to different categories. So a person that is unemployed may be different based on his experience and each category that he is in. Okay, so a rich person, for example, if he is working as a CEO and suddenly he is unemployed, he will not be as burdened as a normal person that maybe needs his job in order to survive. Okay, so there will be different burdens according to age, according to race, gender, education, duration, right? So yeah, so different categories may have different burdens. And basically, if you look at gender, for example, the unequal burden for women and men. Okay, so there are different percentages for this. Okay, so if you look at gender, in 2009, for example, the unemployed for men was higher than women. Okay, and this basically affects the household. Okay, because maybe the men were the more provides more for the household, and this will then affect the population as a whole, because the men that was providing for the household are no longer working, and this will cause a burden to the society. Okay. This is, yeah, so unemployed person. Yeah, in Malaysia, the statistics is a bit different. Okay, so in Malaysia, the female, sorry, this is population outside of labor force. Okay, so these are people who are outside of labor force, whereby these are people who potentially can work, but they are not willing to work. Okay, so these are because if you look at the definition of labor, right, labor force, these are people who are willing plus able. Okay, so there are people who are able to work, but they are not willing to work. Okay, so for example, housewives. So housewives are more than able to work. For example, if they go to the job market, they can work. However, they are not willing to find a job because they want to remain in the house and take care of the house. Okay, so this is, I think, based on depending on the society. And in Malaysia, the people who are outside of the labor force, majority are the female. So they are, you can assume that most of them are housewives. So they are able but are not willing to work. Okay, and in some countries, they are also providing allowances for, actually they are providing allowances for housewives or house husbands. Okay, so maybe this is something that we can consider as well. Okay. Oh yeah, so and this figure, yeah, so this figure looks at chart 1 here, looks at employed person. Okay, so in terms of people in the labor force, 55% have secondary qualification, 32% have tertiary education. Okay, so most of the people who are working only complete high school. Okay, and only around 30% have university qualification. Okay, and this figure basically, if you want to look at the age group of people who are unemployed, basically the younger people are the most that are unemployed. So if you look at the age range, 15 to 24, the highest, followed by 24 to 34. Okay, so usually these are the people who just graduated and they are starting to look for a job. And I think during the pandemic, this was also very, very challenging for new graduates. When you graduate from university during the pandemic and you were looking for a job, basically you were also competing with people who already had jobs before the pandemic but were fired or were laid off. Okay, so these were already experienced people, but because the pandemic happened, they had to be cut off from their job, and they were also looking for new jobs. Okay, and basically the new graduates had to compete with them. So when they go to interview, they saw older people also going for interview. Okay, so this is the challenge. I think still ongoing until today. Okay, so when you graduate later, you will also have to face this challenge, and therefore we see in terms of the percentage of people who are unemployed are actually the young people. Okay, the majority are young people who are unemployed. And another factor is because when companies lay off workers, they usually cut off the juniors first. Okay, so the seniors usually they remain because they have built a relationship over time and they already train and have the skills. But the juniors, they will cut off first. Okay, so you see many young people who were laid off during the recession. Okay. Yeah, so there is also the non-economic cost to because of unemployment. So there are many effects of unemployment. Basically, if you are unemployed, you have loss of skills and loss of self-respect. There's plummeting morale. there's family disintegration because unemployment, because you don't have any income, and then it will cause destruction to the family, and then cause poverty, reduce hope, heighten racial and ethnic tensions. There will be cases of suicide, homicide, mental illness, and this, I think, in Malaysia we had quite a number of these cases during the lockdown especially, and then also can also lead to violent social and political change as well. Okay. Yeah, so this is basically the effects of unemployment. Okay. So before I move to inflation, is there any question related to unemployment? Can you hear my voice?
Yes, doctor.
Okay. Okay, no questions, huh? Okay, let me move. Okay, so the third part here, which hopefully you have started to realize is currently happening in many countries around the world. Okay, so this is currently happening. Inflation. Okay, so what is inflation? Basically, it is the general rise in the price level. Okay, so generally across the board, prices of goods and services are increasing. Okay, and usually the cause is because of too much money chasing too few goods. Okay, so this will cause inflation. So either it has it came about because suddenly people had too much money, or suddenly goods and services, the quantity of goods and services reduce, or it can happen both at the same time. Okay, so for example, uh, uh, during this period, there is a disruption to the supply chain. Okay, so China is in lockdown, so now goods that have been coming in from China, we can no longer access. So there's few goods that is available in the market, and because of that, everyone tries to compete to get these goods, and therefore they will bid up the price. And when they bid up the price, they will cause inflation. Okay, so generally, inflation you can calculate through the consumer price index. So we have the consumer price index, the CPI. Okay, and one of the effects of inflation, it will reduce the purchasing power of money. Okay, so for example, if you had $100 previously, and you go to the supermarket, you can buy maybe one full basket of goods. Okay, maybe three, let's say four items. Okay, in the basket. But now because of inflation, you can only buy three. Maybe you can only buy three items. Okay, so your purchasing power of 100 has reduced. Previously you can buy four, but now you can only buy three. So your purchasing power of that 100 reduced. Okay, because of the increase in price. Okay, so previously maybe the price of these three items is 25, and sorry, the price of the four items each was $25. So you can buy four. Okay, but because of the increase in price, now it is $35. Okay, so you, with that same 100, you cannot buy four anymore. You can only afford to buy, actually, yeah, you can afford to buy only, even no, 35 is too much. You can't even buy three, maybe 30. Okay, so 30. So now the price increased 30. You can only buy three items. So with the same money, your purchasing power has reduced. Okay, so this is the effect of inflation. Okay, so you can calculate inflation through consumer price index. Okay, so the term is consumer price index. So how do they calculate this? They usually the responsible agencies. So in the case of Malaysia, we have the Department of Statistics. Okay, Department of Statistics, what they do is they would go to the market. So they would go to the market and they would see what are the price of goods. They would take the common things that people buy in the market and put it in a basket. Okay, so they would put it in a basket. Okay, so they would see what is the price of each good and what is the price of this basket. Okay, so let's say they take 1 kilo of in Malaysia we have maybe they take 10 kilos of rice, and then they take chicken, maybe one chicken, one cooking oil, one sugar. Okay, just for example, and then overall this basket of goods, let's say it costs 100. Okay, so this is the price of the most recent this is the price of the basket of goods during, let's say, 2021. Okay, so all this cost 100 ringgit. Okay, so in order to know what is the CPI for 2022, this department or this agency will go to the same market and they will take the same item from and put it in the basket, and they will see what is the price. Right? So in 2022, they take the same item. Okay, they take 10 kilos of rice, one chicken, one cooking oil, one sugar. Okay, and they see actually the price has increased from 100 to 105. Okay, so then you can calculate the CPI. Okay, so the recent figure of CPI in terms of the price of the most recent market basket is 105. ARM 105. So you can calculate for CPI, basically 105 minus the previous year, okay, which is 100 over 100. So times 100, and you can get the CPI number of 5%. Okay, so this example in here, of course the figure, of course the calculation may not be 100, so it can be 233, for example. Okay, and then the next year can be 236.7. So you can calculate each year what is the CPI. Okay, and usually you can have a CPI that is based on the previous year, or it can be based on what they call a base year. Okay, so maybe 2021 can be the base year. Okay, so and for each next 5 years, we base our CPI on the numbers of 2021, not the previous year, right? So then you can calculate from the base year what is the CPI from 2021. Yeah, but usually they usually show figures comparing year on year or comparing from the base year. So you have to see what is the actual figures from the CPI. Okay, but basically this is how they calculate what is the increase in price level of a country. Okay, so they have a basket of goods, but of course in terms of the things, the items that are in the basket is more than this, and they also have include other items such as oil prices, such as commodity prices. These are also factored in the CPI. Okay, so this is how you calculate CPI. Okay, and then you have basically different countries may have different inflations. Okay, so basically the CPI represents the number of inflation. Okay, and depending on the type of the country and the exposure of the country to the global economy, they will have different levels of inflation. Okay, yeah, and then you have different years. It may go up and may go down. Okay, so there are different types of inflation. There are inflation that is caused by demand pull inflation or cost push inflation. Okay, so demand pull inflation, we will learn about this later on, but basically it is caused because of increase in spending and demand. Okay, so if you look at the price, quantity is supply, is demand, but in macro we have aggregate supply and aggregate demand. Okay, so demand on the overall economy, and this is basically saying that inflation happens because demand increase. So aggregate demand increase. So when aggregate demand increase, okay, this is AD1, this is AD2. Okay, so prices also go up. Okay, because demand has increased, and this is basically when there's too much money in the economy. Okay, excess spending relative to output, and it may also be caused by central banks issuing too much money. Okay, when the central bank pumps in money in the economy, it will also cause demand pull inflation. Okay, another type of inflation is because of cost push inflation. The cost push inflation is related to supply. Okay, so price, quantity, we have the aggregate supply, have the aggregate demand, and what happens is that aggregate supply reduces. The aggregate supply reduces. Okay, aggregate supply. So the price from here increase to here. Okay, so when aggregate supply reduces, basically there will be less goods and services in the economy. Okay, and this is related to supply shocks. Okay, and you can maybe say there will be increase in price per unit output. Okay, however, you must also be aware that this can also, the demand pull inflation and cost push inflation can also happen at the same time. It can happen at the same time. Okay, and basically, for example, in this case, if I draw demand, aggregate demand here. Okay, so aggregate demand 1 here, aggregate demand 2 here. So now you have a new P3 here. Okay, so this happens when there is a cost push inflation where aggregate supply reduces and demand pull inflation happening at the same time. And arguably, this is what is happening now in the current situation. If you read the news over the past few weeks, okay, especially in US and Europe, and we are also experiencing this in Malaysia, where there is demand pull inflation because there is excessive spending, especially in the US, where many people have extra money to spend because the government gave money to people, but also because of the war in Russia and in Ukraine, and also the supply chain disruption from China, the aggregate supply also reduced because the resources and the supply cannot be sent from China to other countries. Okay, and also the war in Russia, the war in Ukraine caused the disruption in terms of certain commodities such as wheat and grain, right, coming out for these countries. Right, so this is the thing that is the types of inflation that can happen. Okay, so it is quite difficult to distinguish the inflation types, but we can have some idea based on what happened. Okay, and the type differ in sustainability. Okay, usually demand pull inflation will continue as long as there is excessive spending. Okay, and cost push ends during a recession. Okay, so usually after when a recession happens, usually the cost push uh, from demand, excessive spending will end the cost push inflation. Okay, but this is not necessarily the default case like what is happening now. Okay, because there is excessive spending, but because the government has transferred money that is printed from the central bank to the people, and that's causing this as well. And when we look at the core figures of inflation, when we what is being put in the basket when we calculate the CPI, okay, there are different categories as well. Okay, so there is categories of food, energy goods. Okay, so the core category of CPI may influence inflation more and may affect the inflation figures more. Okay, because it is a very significant factor in terms of inflation and how it affects the economy as a whole. Okay, so you have to ensure that these core inflation figures are stable. Okay, so in terms of food and energy, these are usually the focus of government. So governments usually have to take care of these figures and ensure that the numbers do not go too high. If not, it will cause havoc in the country. Okay. So there are what we call the redistribution effects of inflation. So what is the effect of inflation? What is the impact of inflation? So usually when inflation happens, okay, we have our wages, we have our income, right? So for example, if we have a wage of 10,000, okay, so let's say ARM 10,000, we have income of 10,000. When inflation happens, there is no adjustments. So we still get, even if inflation happens, we still get 10,000. However, our real income actually in terms of our spending power, because of the inflation, now our spending power reduces in terms of our real income. Okay, because the 10,000 previously when we spent and during the previous year, for this year may not be the same. Okay, so there is a difference in terms of the effects towards nominal income and the real income. Okay, and basically based on this, some people are uh, arguing that we have to adjust income based on inflation. So if inflation happens, you should actually increase the income of people, the wages of the people, in order to have the similar purchasing power. Okay, so so then you can calculate percentage change in real income and also percentage change in nominal income. Sorry, you can calculate percentage change in real income by calculating percentage change in nominal income minus percentage change in price level. Okay, so then you can adjust the income level, the wages that you give based on this figure. Okay, so who is hurt by inflation? These are fixed income earners. Okay, so if you have, for example, if you have a bond, okay, so you have a bond that promises to pay 5% over per annum. Okay, every year you get a return of 5%. However, inflation also happens 5%. Okay, so then the value of the bond is basically cancels out each other. So the returns that you get basically is just enough to cover for inflation. Okay, so this is people who are hurt by inflation. Secondly, who are hurt by inflation? People who save money. People who save money, especially the money that does not get any interest. Okay, or if the interest or the return rates are lower than inflation. For example, if you save money in the bank and you get 3% return, however, the inflation is 5%. Okay, so basically your value of money actually deteriorates by 2%. So the purchasing power, if you have 100 ringgit if you have 100 ringgit and you save, you get 3% return, you get 3 ringgit return. However, when you spend that 103 ringgit, actually you cannot have the same basket of goods. If you go to the supermarket and try to buy the same things that you bought previously, you cannot buy because actually the inflation has reduced your accumulated savings value. So it has deteriorated. Okay. And then thirdly, creditors, people who lend money. Okay. So basically, if you lend money and you say, okay, I will charge you 4% interest. Okay, 4% interest. However, inflation is 5%. So you will also basically get hurt by inflation because your returns that you get is lower than inflation. Okay. Who are people who are unaffected by inflation? So these are people who have flexible income. Okay, so maybe income of income that is adjusted to inflation. People who receive social security, receive pensions, for example. So they are usually adjusted to inflation. And people who are in debt, who pay back the debt, but the debt is a fixed amount, but because of the increase in inflation, actually they are paying at the lower rate. Okay? So the value of money, because they are paying back money that has depreciated, then actually they are, you can argue, actually profit from it. Okay, so these are people who are unaffected. Yeah, so if you realize, okay, in the US, they are anticipating inflation. Okay, so when they anticipate inflation, the government is responding by adjusting the interest rate. Okay, so they have the real interest rate, okay, whereby they change the rates. Okay, and this is usually based on inflation. And then we have the nominal interest rate where the rates are not adjusted by inflation. Okay, so currently, not only in US but also in Europe, the governments are increasing the interest rate, and we can not government, sorry, central banks are increasing the interest rate, and we will learn about this later on in monetary policy and why why they are doing this. Okay. Yeah. So when you anticipate when you anticipate inflation, then you can you will financial institution will adjust what is actually the nominal interest rate. So if they charge, for example, 11% on interest, and they already consider what is the inflation later on, 6%. Okay, for example. So basically, effectively, they only get a return of 5% because the 6% has been, in terms of the value of money, has been cut off from the inflation that happened. Okay, so this is basically the application in the financial industry. Okay. Redistribution issues. Basically, there is also in some cases where deflation happens. So instead of prices going up, there are cases where prices actually go down. So this is especially true in societies with aging population. Aging population. So if you go to Japan, for example, in certain areas, in most areas, actually the prices of goods and services have not changed much, maybe around 1%, 2% their inflation level. But there are in certain areas where prices have gone down a lot, especially in terms of real estate property. Okay, because in some areas, when the older people die, no one wants to live in their houses anymore. Okay, even their children have moved to other places. Okay, so this has caused a very significant drop in property. Okay, especially in aging populations, and also when people age, they do not spend much. in terms of the consumption, they also reduce. Okay, so when consumption is reduced, they will also lead to lower prices. Okay, because not many people want to spend. The only way for them to spend is to reduce the price. Okay, so this happens in countries like Japan. Okay, and then there are, I forgot what are the points for this. So in the case of deflation, basically the income may also rise. So when prices go down, the real income, the purchasing power that you have from your wage or your earnings may increase. Okay, so there is that income improvement, and also fixed asset value may fall. So like property just now I mentioned, the value may fall as well. And then in terms of, because of this, the mortgage or the debt that you if you want to get a loan from the bank, basically the fixed rate mortgage also reduces, because no one wants to borrow from the bank in order to buy property. So the bank now has to, in order for them to promote their debt, right? So if you want to borrow, come borrow from us, we will give you a very, very cheap rate. So this, in terms of the debt, will also decrease, okay, the value of the interest of the debt. Okay, so when so I forgot this point. It's okay. Skip that one. Okay. So the question is basically whether inflation will affect output, and basically will it affect economic growth. Okay, so in the case of cost push inflation, it will reduce real output. It will reduce the growth, and it redistributes a decreased level of real income because of the decrease in purchasing power. Okay, and in the case of demand pull inflation, so in the case of demand pull inflation, okay, there has been cases when the argument is that, okay, there are some arguments where they argue that zero inflation is good. Okay, we do not want any inflation at all. Okay, however, another view is that there must be some sort of mild inflation in order to promote growth. Okay, because when you have inflation, a small percentage of inflation, and you adjust wages according to the increase in inflation, this eventually will help to increase the economic growth. Okay, so this is the arguments that are brought forward. So therefore, some governments or some countries, they would target a certain level of inflation. Okay, I think in Malaysia we target around 2 to 3% inflation. So we want to see an increase in general prices of goods and services, but within this range. Okay, because mild inflation is good for economic growth. So when you have that mild inflation, you can promote the financial sector, you can promote the economic sector, and therefore it will promote the economic growth as well. Okay. However, we do not want it to go above the target, and this because this may cause hyperinflation. So this will hyperinflation is basically extraordinary rapid inflation, and this will devastate economy. So in this case, for example, I think in Zimbabwe, when hyperinflation happens, businesses do not even know what prices to put, and consumers do not know what actually is the fair price for them to pay, and money becomes worthless during this time because of hyperinflation. And I think in Southeast Asia we experienced this in Indonesia as well, and during the ASEAN financial crisis. And we saw currently we are using the Indonesian rupiah is around 100,000 rupiah. So 100,000 rupiah is around 40-50 ringgit now. Okay, so it is also caused by hyperinflation during this time. Okay, so we do not want to have this happening, and one of the reasons this happened is because too much money is printed. Okay, so when you have too much money chasing too few goods, this will cause the inflation, and when it is hyper amount of money, it will cause hyperinflation. Okay, so if you want to print money, you also have to ensure that the production of goods and services catch up with the money growth as well. Okay, yeah, so recently this is what is happening. Okay, in the US, inflation climbed to 8.5% in March, and this is highest rate since 1981. Okay, if you compare over the two-year period, okay, during the pandemic, inflation didn't go above 3%, but during the start of 2021, it increased, and now it is around 8.5%. Okay. Okay, so yeah, so these are some questions. Maybe I want you to answer. What will the US government response be because of the inflation? Here. Okay, think about it, and I'll call your name randomly. Think about it, huh? Sorry. Oh, Munira. Sorry, I there was a typo there. I didn't write your name correctly. But Munira, okay, what do you think will the US government do because of the inflation?
Maybe
based on the news just now. Yeah.
maybe the US government can set minimum wages jobs. So
Why?
wages, because if the wages is too low, people will have lower purchasing power.
Okay.
And
That's a
also,
good.
maybe they can also set a price ceiling for some goods.
Okay. That's a good point. I think in terms of minimum wage, they already have that. In terms of price ceiling, I think US government they do not intervene because they are free market, so they do not want to intervene in terms of putting the price ceiling. But good points. We'll discuss later. I just want another opinion. Yeah, Sundus, what do you think? Are you there, Sundus? What will the government do? Because inflation is high, what will they do? Sorry? Are you there, Sundus?
Yes, doctor.
Yeah, what can the government do? What can the US government do?
They lower the employment.
Lower the employment.
Yeah.
How can the government lower the employment? Sorry? How can the government lower the employment? Any idea?
No.
Okay, let's ask another person. There again. This again. Sulaiman. Brother Sulaiman. Are you there?
Yeah.
So based on the news here, okay, what can the government do? What is the US government going to do to address this situation?
Maybe they can like use price control.
Okay, so they control the prices.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's say, but the government, US government, they don't intervene in the market, in the especially, yeah, they don't do the price control. What else can they do?
A wage or something. They can use wage maybe.
So they will do the minimum wage.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I think, yeah. Thank you for the response. Okay, so this is basically, I just want to introduce you because we will actually learn this in topics of monetary policy and fiscal policy. Okay, but this is because this is happening now and this is related to the current situation. Okay, so if you look at the headline, actually, US inflation climbed 8.5% in March, highest since 1981, and this is because of the war that drive up energy cost. And basically what will happen is that they will raise interest rates. Okay, so they have just recently increased the interest rate. So the reasoning is so the reasoning why they want to raise interest rate. Okay, we will learn this later on during the monetary policy. Okay, interest rate. So basically the idea is that if you increase interest rate, you will then cause debt or loans to be more expensive. Okay, so when loans are more expensive, people would not go to the bank and borrow. So when people do not go to the bank and borrow, they will consume less. Okay, so in terms of consumption, so when you increase interest rate, consumption supposedly will reduce. So spending will also, basically consumption is spending. So spending will reduce. And because of increasing interest rate, people will save more money in the bank. Why? Because when you save money in the bank, you can get more interest. Okay, so instead of taking out money from the bank to spend, you will put money in the bank to get more interest. Okay, and when interest rate increase, okay, it will also pull out money from the economy, because when money is circulating in the economy, this will cause the inflation to happen. But when interest rate increase, the activity in the economy in terms of consumption reduces and savings increase, including savings from businesses. So businesses are also will take out money from the economy or in the market and put it in their banks to get higher interest. So when this happens, hopefully inflation will reduce. Okay, but the effects will not only be felt by the US, but also be felt around the world. And we are already experiencing this effect in Malaysia and in other countries, whereby this affects the currency. Okay, in Malaysia, we have depreciation against the United States, and also exports and imports. Why? Because now US dollar, people are pulling away the money that they have put in other countries, right? So because now interest rate has increased, they are taking away, for example, if they have invested 100 million US dollar in Malaysia, but suddenly there's the news that interest rate in US has increased. So if they put money in the US, they will get higher returns, right? So they will pull out the money from Malaysia. So they will take out the money that they have invested in Malaysia and then put their money in the banks in the US. So this will basically cause a capital outflow of funds from Malaysia into the US. Okay, so that will also affect the currency rate and also affect our inflation rate in Malaysia. Okay, because these are interrelated factors. Okay, so it's something that you have to be aware of, especially if you are interested in investing in the capital market, for example, and interested in economic situations, right? So we will see in the coming months, the returns from stock market will reduce, and also in many countries, their currencies will also depreciate, okay, because of inflation and also increase in interest rate. Right? So we will learn about this more in monetary policy and fiscal policy, but this is just something that I think you should be aware of that is currently happening. Okay, so this is the effects that will happen in the markets and global economy. Okay, so I think that's all from me. Is there any questions for the topics that we learned today? Okay, yeah. So if you are confused or if you do not understand, I highly recommend you to do your own revision. Okay, and also do because the resources are there. You have the textbook that I've provided. There's a lot of videos online that can help explain these concepts as well, right? Because these are very fundamental concepts. These are basic concepts. Later on, you will get to learn more complicated concepts, and hopefully you can understand these basic concepts. Okay, and this is very important. Okay, because it is for your progression as well in terms of knowledge and also your career. Okay, because if you do not understand these basic economic concepts, it will be hard, especially if you are a practitioner in Islamic finance, because this will be very much related to Islamic finance later on. You will see in your practice or in the jobs that you in the jobs that you eventually take. Okay. No, is there any questions before we end? Okay, everyone okay? Can you hear me?
Doctor, if we say that the inflation has risen to 8%, what does that mean?
So if you take one basket of goods, last year it cost 100, and if you go to the same market and you take the same basket of goods, this year it will cost 108. You understand?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So if you take the same items, you put in a basket. Last year it cost 100. You go this year, it will cost 108. So that's the CPI basically. But the CPI, actually, let's see what different countries, they have different CPI. But let's see what Malaysia, how we calculate CPI. Yeah, let me just show you. So we have Yeah, these are the categories we have. Currently 2.2%. Yeah, so different sectors in terms of food, housing, transport, education. So we have all these different categories of CPI. In terms of clothing and footwear, actually negative. But overall, CPI is 2.2% in Malaysia. So we have different categories. And in each category, we have different ways of calculating. Like food and alcoholic beverage, I'm not sure if they show or not. Oh no, they don't show. They don't show the, or maybe this is the breakdown. Yeah, by themes. So if you go to oh no, they don't show. They don't show. I'm not sure. Maybe there is a place where they show what type of goods they put. But basically they have different sectors, okay, in terms of how they calculate the CPI. Okay. Yeah, so I think is there any more questions before we end? Okay. So with that, I think we can end the class with Tasbih Kifarah and Surah Al-As. Subhanakallahumma bihamdika asyhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik. Wal 'asri innal insana lafi khusr illa alladhina amanu wa amilus solihati wa tawassaw bil haqq wa tawassaw bis sabr. Okay, so I wish you all Ramadan Mubarak and Eid Mubarak as well. Okay, inshallah next week we do not have class, so enjoy your break, and hopefully we can see you in physical class, hopefully after Eid. Okay, so I think, yeah, thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Alaikum assalam. Thank you, Doctor.
Waalaikumsalam.
Alaikum Assalam.